Okay, well, I think we're going to get started. I'm Marjorie Nathanson, the Executive Director of Hunterdon Art Museum. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. We're so happy to have Malcolm Mobutu Smith with us on the occasion of his exhibition, Evermore Nevermore. I'd like to thank our major funders, the New Jersey State Council on the Arts, a partner of the National Endowment of the Arts, and the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation, along with other corporations, foundations, and individuals. At the end of Malcolm's presentation, we will be taking questions, so if you have some, please put them in the chat. Malcolm Mobutu Smith is an associate professor of ceramic art at Indiana University. He holds a Master of Fine Arts degree from the New York State College of Ceramics at Alfred University and a BFA in ceramics from Penn State. He has been a speaker and presenter at numerous colleges, museums, and conferences throughout the country. He has also had solo shows at the Evansville Museum of Art, Dickinson College, the University of Kentucky, among many other institutions, and has been included in many group shows from Maine to California, as well as Taiwan, the United Kingdom, and China. His work has been written about in a long list of publications. These include Craft Magazine, American Ceramics Magazine, and Ceramics Monthly, to name just a few. Malcolm's work was included in the exhibition Peters Valley from the Ground Up, which was at Hunterdon Art Museum on the occasion of Peters Valley's 50th anniversary. We were thrilled to have his work at the museum then, and we're eager to share a larger body of his work with our audience. So we were so glad that he agreed to have a solo show here. It's my pleasure to introduce Malcolm Mobutu Smith.
Thank you so much, Marjorie, and thank you all to the friends and colleagues that have joined us today, this evening, and very special thanks to you all at the Hunterdon for all of your help in establishing this solo show and being so generous with your time and energies throughout this process. I've got a nice collection of images to share with you this evening, and I'm just going to sort of share this thing and get it started here so that we can move forward. The title of the show, Evermore Nevermore, has kind of a sing-songy, lyrical, fantasy fairy tale kind of feel to it, but it sort of insinuates the dualities of our current times and energies, both good and bad, and the hopes and dreams and aspirations of generations of people in America trying to strive forward through racial injustice and disparities. So this very powerful, wonderful image is of Little Tuffy, a character you're going to get to know throughout this talk, and this wonderful image is going to hopefully be meaningful to you as you move forward through the talk. So this is a shot of the actual installation at the Hunterdon. It's a collection of mostly new sculptures from 2021 and forward that showcase these totems to our times. So Evermore Nevermore offers a deadpan sardonic totems as reflections of a festering, hate-filled past to a confused and unrepentant present. At times, the work projects a sarcastic specter holding up despicable representations to us, like a visual kind of nails on a chalkboard. Yet weirdly, they may also act as hopeful monuments, sparking ideas for change, rather than continuing the not-so-forgotten ugliness still boiling in the psyche of our culture and our people. So many of these objects sort of twist and turn in space, showing you sometimes their backside or their front side or some split version of the two. And so a kind of an event of whirlwinds or Coriolis effects move you through the space with the objects turning for you and making you turn and move around them. So I very much enjoyed installing this at the Hunterdon. I'm going to start here with David Drake, Dave the Potter, as he's commonly known, not so much because Dave the Potter was an important inspiration to me, but more so that it represents the fact that pots have been around us for time immemorial, and they form the backbone of what interests me as a maker in clay. And pots also have been a place where words and pictures have been moved through and trafficked through time. And Dave the Potter used them in the same way, with small poems and his name written proudly across the surface of these things. My works also have used their surfaces as a motivating tool to deliver messages and language across their surfaces, both graffiti, line and form, but also just the wriggling movements of abstraction and designs that are propelled as both two-dimensional and three-dimensional hopscotches of visual information. This extends to the outer surface, but also underneath, where my identity and the form and linear hopscotch continues even as I sign the works, whether it's with my initials, with the MS, or my whole middle name, Mobutu, in the center. I try to have the objects sort of represent the physical truth of the declared two-dimensional images that are going on the surface. The magic of clay, though, is what really propels me and probably propelled people like Dave the Potter through with this material. The fact that clay is this plastic material that can be moved, manipulated, and can react in the moment to the whims of the artist and the maker is what I try to play with. And so here's an early piece of mine from an ongoing series called my Cloud Cup series. But this movement into clay began, and in art more formally began, because I feel like I am the representation of the hopes and dreams of two very brave people, my mother and father, who came together in the tumultuous civil rights movement plagued era of the early 60s, and were brave enough to come together as a couple. And so I, in the center there, represent through my life now, and from then, the sort of aspirations of the joining of these two fractious, unnecessary, boiling attitudes about race in this country. And it continues through me and through my family, with my son Owen there and my lovely wife, as we continue to blend and meld our worldviews. But as a maker and a thinker, I'm the synthesis of the two people that bravely came together. My father, Pat Smith, went to Michigan State University, where he met my mother, who was, they were both in the art program there. And I think it's no surprise that I started to follow that path. But through my father, who was a designer, mechanical engineer, draftsman, he taught at a design school in Lansing, Michigan for years, called the Community Design Center. And so from a very young age, I was surrounded by elevation studies and mechanical renderings that showed drawing from this point of view. And his aspirations as a maker and designer were also in the car industry. And he was about to step into the role of a car designer at Buick or GM in the early 60s, but they wanted him to be in a glass-walled front office of the building, and he had too much pride to take the job. So his dreams sort of to be a car designer ended that day when he didn't want to be a monkey in a box. My mother, on the other hand, got her degree in painting and drawing, and upon leaving school, she started doing medical illustration. And this is a representation of the amazing skills that my mother has as a draftsman. And so I was competing against this as a child, and this is more of her work. And now she has moved forward and has committed her life to quilting as her creative outlet. So I still get to live through both of these wonderful people who are still with us today, making and moving forward with their creativity. One of the most important things that my mother created, and with the help of my father, in 1971 was a coloring book called Little Tuffy and His ABCs, which represents the fact that she knew when she was pregnant that there was going to be nothing on the store shelves that reflected children of color that she would be able to buy and hand to me and my brother Jason to play with and color in. So she determined with her skills to make her own version of this. And with the help of my father, they got it published through Ebony Magazine out of Chicago with Johnson Publishing Company. And it was in print for 30 some years, and it's now out of print. There were two different books, Little Tuffy and His ABCs and Little Tuffy y sus Amigos, which came out in 1978. And it's no small amazement to know that it was a thrill to grow up holding these books, coloring them in, knowing that that daddy image was my dad, and that my namesake, Malcolm X, was in there, and I could color him in as I so chose, and I could fill these things in. And I knew that the generation of this object was somebody very close to me, my mother. I could look up and say, you did this. And so that same sentiment is what sort of compels me as a maker. The idea of the self, for the self, and by the self, that we can will into being as artists things that we want, and we come up with the rules and we get to fill in those rules. So these black lines that represent coloring book lines are the rules of the artist. We get to fill those things in ourselves. So I started very young in clay and dedicated my life to ceramics in high school. And I was lucky enough to go to an amazing high school in the suburbs of Philadelphia on the main line. And at the age of 14, 15, I said I wanted to be a teacher and I wanted to be a ceramic artist. And I haven't really looked back since then. There's some strange inversions that happened through my lifetime, dealing with the fact that some weird ironies. I grew up poor and destitute with my white mother in a mostly Black area of Flint, Michigan, and yet I grew up affluent and alone, mostly as a singular Black man in most of my classes in the suburbs of a very affluent part of Philadelphia, in the suburbs of Pennsylvania. And so I discovered more ironies. I discovered hip hop and music and all that in those same suburbs and not in the inner city of Flint. And so all these inversions and ironies and upside down relationships are interesting. But I feel like in myself as a person, I embody the ability to transmute both my African American identity and my white academic identity and speak the languages of both of those sides all the time. So I feel magically gifted in the middle of those things. Early on in my career, I was immediately trying to draw connections between my African American and African heritage and my own current identity. So I made sculptures that tried to play out these ideas while I was in school. And this amazing mosaic of teachers is sort of the pantheon of folks that I was lucky enough to have as mentors. You'll notice something about that pantheon of people. I had not one person of color in all of my schooling, and this includes both undergraduate, elementary ed, and high school. And this is the folks that I had in my art development. So this is undergrad teachers, my graduate school, amazing folks, and even a couple of people in here that are my current faculty. Both Tim Mather are here and John Goodhart, Emeriti faculty from IU. But like clay, people come in many, many different colors. And there were a handful of people of color that were there at the beginning of my career as an artist, in clay, that is. And these five names, these five beautiful people, were the only people I had as mentors from afar. They were never my direct teachers, and they only were there out there by example. So I'm going to choose here with this opportunity to share with you some of their work very quickly. And obviously, things have changed. So this is a shot of NCECA, the Color Network, which is a gathering of all the artists of color at the annual NCECA conference. And so our numbers have ballooned, but those five names or five images in the previous slide were the only people I knew when I started in clay back in 1988. So Winnie Owens Hart makes these amazing figurative works that play off of her connections to Africa. She set up a school in Ghana and moves back and forth between the States and Africa all the time. James Tanner, even at the beginning of my career, was already a senior figure in clay and made these amazing expressionist wall pieces. Dave McDonald's work graces the inside of my father's home. I talked him into buying one of his platters. And so we have a beautiful David McDonald platter in our home. And James Watkins has the twin relationship of having gone to one of the undergraduate institutions that I went to, the Kansas City Art Institute, and he actually got his graduate degree right here in Bloomington, Indiana, years ago. So there's a wonderful full circle loop that he represents. And this is some of his work. Sid Carpenter, also from Pennsylvania, is another amazing person that I knew early on in my career, who I looked up to as a guidepost, but never had as a direct mentor. And then there's undiscovered people, people that I've just discovered this year as a 52-year-old man dedicated to clay, studying the material all these times. And I just now learned of Doyle Lane's existence in 2022. And he had an amazing retrospective show apparently in Los Angeles back in the early 2000s or late 1990s. And he was an amazing mid-century giant in clay, but unknown to most in this country because I think mostly it was a West Coast phenomena. But similar to people like James Lavera or Rose Cabot, he dedicated his life to teaching and making profoundly interesting vessel forms where surface and glaze was his primary interest as a formal investigatory material. And then there are the superstars that, of course, were definitely far away from me in some ways, but were superheroes in my mind. So we have Magdalena Odondo and her amazing objects that that I saw in magazines and articles and acted as amazing guideposts to point my ship at. And currently we have Simone Lee, who is going to be representing us at the Venice Biennale as the USA artist, and her amazing works on the High Line in New York City, Brick House. Her example has been truly inspirational to generations of people now. She's even moving into fashion design, reshaping beauty for Black women. Theaster Gates is another luminary in the field with his multidisciplinary approach to clay and art making. He's an amazing example of an activist working in mixed media, multimedia, and both as an urban renewal agent, does collections, archives, and he even worked with the Johnson Publishing Company recently and has saved many of the Ebony magazine archives. And then on to my colleagues, the people I call my peer group, and I wanted to take this time to share with you some of their work. So we have Sam Harvey, who makes amazing stuff and has a gallery out in Colorado. Bobby Scroggins teaches down in Kentucky and makes amazing work that merges metal and ceramics. My good friend Kevin Snipes, who's nomadic and makes work all the time, everywhere, and workshop to workshop. Brother Paul Briggs out in Massachusetts with these amazing meditative vessel forms that are just exquisite declarations of persistence, spirituality, and form. I had to put in 2 slides of his stuff because it's just so amazing. All made in one sitting, each piece. And Donote Hayes, who's a new amazing talent in the field. And finally, we have Roberto Lugo, a mentee of mine and someone who looks up to and has been stepping forward into the world of art writ large with his recent show at the Metropolitan Museum of Art and his declaration that pottery can save the world and had saved his life. And like him, he leans into his own inner city origins as part of his influence and instigation for his work. And he's showcasing the civil rights era and all of the figures on his works through the medium of pottery. And like him, I'm connected to hip hop as part of my generative origins. And here we can see my interactions with the amazing Dougie Fresh on the left, the indomitable Donald D in the middle, and Brame, a superstar graffiti writer from New York City. Each of us connected through our own agency of the same era of hip hop. Myself as a breakdancer, beatboxer, and graffiti artist myself, I use these urgencies in my art making, and they form the backbone of some of the aesthetics of my teaching. But I'm teacher first and foremost. And so here are 2 images of me doing some of that work with some students and out in the community here on the back of my graffiti painted truck, throwing pots off the back of the truck there. And graffiti for me is the backbone of the work that you see at the Hunterdon. So much of the forms and energies and improvisations come from the ethic within graph to be both original but also improvisational in the creation of letter forms that populate the space of the inner city and try to take over and retake the space of the urban lifestyle. So here we see a character by the name of Ramelzi, who is a living, walking, breathing part of a graffiti attitude, a hip hop attitude. And the sentiments that he has here, that the letter is armed to stop all phony formations, lies and technologies placed upon its structure, is an attitude of agency that graffiti has that I'm trying to step into with my works. But my work ultimately lies somewhere between sibling rivalry and shared passions. This is my two brothers, and I live vicariously through their creative energies. My brother's outside doing his graffiti, his skateboarding and extreme sports lifestyle, and my brother Alex is a jazz bassist of great renown, living and working in New York City. Somewhere between my two colleagues, one now the late David Baker, the jazz superstar here at the Jacob School of Music, and Douglas Hofstadter, who is an amazing philosopher. And I pinch myself that I can say I'm on the same faculty at IU that he operates in. Somewhere between the stoic interrogations of art forms by Chris Staley and Don Pilcher. My work lies somewhere between the ridiculous and the outrageous, the formal attitudes that are going on between this contemporary piece of graffiti and this outstanding bike frame for a lowrider motorcycle are things that get me jazzed up in the studio. Between Teco Ware and Stella's Dare, a Teco Ware vase from the 1910s and this amazing three-dimensional painting by Frank Stella inform my attitudes and formal thrusts. Between cobblery and horology, the idea that crafts fit so squarely within this intimate space of material, process, and technique gets me excited and keeps me motivated. Somewhere between the graphic and the gut, the graphic design attitudes, the sort of super flat quality of great graphic design seen here in this 1920s magazine, or in the gut location of the art moved out of Bill Traylor, this man who walked off a plantation in the 1800s and started picking up crayons and cardboard to draw the feelings and ideas in his mind. Somewhere between two Kirks, we have Rashawn Willen Kirk, the amazing jazz hornist who had played multiple instruments at a time, a kind of example that's set far beyond anything that's achievable, but is an amazing thing to see and witness and hear. And then equally amazing is the whirling dervish that was Kirk Mangus, an amazing potter friend from Kent State. And to my other colleagues here at IU, between obsession and inquiry, the idea that I'm a teacher and have pointed my ship in the direction of education most of my life is something that gets me jazzed up. And I'm around people that have equally insatiable energy for collecting. And somewhere between invention and inspiration, my work lies. Our IU Eskenazi Art Museum on the right, and a piece of my work designed in a CAD program. And then somewhere between the infamous and the inflated, the concept that all these systems and designs of an outsider form of graffiti have now migrated their way into pop culture, into the commercial world, into the everyday through designer toys like this bear sculpture / toy piece, and then how we can see the line qualities and energies that are evoked in the cartoon structures and conventions of a cartoon comic book from the 1940s. These are things that are aspirational in my work. But equally aspirational is the fact that I'm somewhere between the energies and ethics of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, the two divergent points of view about their agency towards civil rights movement. And so I've used my work and I've had the opportunity to have my work represented in multiple shows that feature these syntheses of inspirations. So pottery language, historical pottery forms, and contemporary graffiti, and my own improvisational jazzy works with line and form. This sentiment that the vessel is my wall is one of the main things that gets me excited about being in the space of the three-dimensional object, that I can make the wall that I can then populate with images. And then this wall can actually rotate and be 360. But sometimes it's literal. I use that the motivations of these shows to bring the actual spirit of graffiti into the space. So we built a wall for one of my exhibitions with graffiti and other graffiti writers, and then we engaged with the local community and got them some hands-on time with it. But the totality of it is that these energies resolve into my own abstract creations that are based on vessel forms and graffiti. The polychromatic strategy, the fact that edges become form and edges become material, and that material becomes line and liquid all at the same time, are things that really keep me jazzed up for the material of clay and for the infinite possibility of teaching through clay. But like the formal shapes and movements that are improvised by breakdancers, I want my works to have this same dynamic. And so we see here in this continuation of the Cloud Cup series, this dynamic movement of forms moving in counterposed directions, of the glaze sometimes frozen and other times feeling liquid movement as being part of the aesthetic that I shoot for. This is a mirroring of the agency that I have when I'm drawing on in space. So the two-dimensional illusionistic space of drawing, I play through, much like my father's elevation studies and drafting. I can see and move and turn and enjoy building form in the two-dimensional, imagining and dreaming about what's on the other side of these pictures. And then they result in these interpretations. Not one-to-one, but definitely the drawing feeds these in the moment building happenings in clay. And then again, we have the opportunity in ceramics to populate the surface with a continuation of that two-dimensional play. So three-dimensional physics can happen and two-dimensional illusion can continue. But even more exciting is the fact that CAD/CAM programming, the fact that you can design and build in a CAD program a form that never existed, and then push print on a 3D printer and make that thing a reality in the three-dimensional world, is the actual beautiful synthesis of all those ideas. And so here we can see the design of one object that I built in a CAD program and then printed out of powdered gypsum with full color in the printer. So it's an amazing smashing of every urgency that I have in clay and drawing. And even more connected to that 2 and 3D smashing up was the one and only opportunity I've had to do a commission, a large scale commission for the Eskenazi Health Hospital in Indianapolis, was my proposition to create large scale tiles that would float amidst as a wayfinding device for the hospital. So my works reside on the third floor of the thing, and you're supposed to recognize that you're going to go to this wing of the clinic based on knowing that these artworks are there. And so this is called cloud busting, and each of these pieces is about 3.5 foot across flat tile with various textures and surface things that play with the edges of the form and sort of deny the physical reality of the tile. And then I painted an undulating form on the background to sort of suggest the wavy cloud-like space that they're within. That wavy cloud-like space and that graphic relationship between the 2 and 3D moves forward, even in the way that I represent my cloud cups in person with these backsplashes that act as the communication line between the source material of graffiti or the actual ghost image of a three-dimensional form, and also form unique new playgrounds for the opportunities for color, line, and form to intersect the three-dimensional object. And more recently, in the Cloud Cup series, I've started to tame down the amount of colors I'm using and moving toward a more monochromatic approach or more deliberate use of the source material. So here we can see graffiti populating the surface of a cloud cup. And in the bottom piece, we have a very limited palette set here where I'm really trying to break apart form and shapes and highlight singular moments. throughout the pandemic, I was restricted in some cases with the access to certain studio things, and I started to push the agenda of my carving in 2- and 3-dimensional hopscotch into a much smaller formal object. So I made a bunch of mugs that have been really great, a great limitation for the same strategy that I want to have. So what happens if I only have 4 inches of object and I want to do and represent the same amount of sculptural depth that I was getting from my larger forms? And what about the handle? And so every handle is a moment to be solved, and every surface is a moment to be invested or infested with this sort of sculptural 2-dimensional form of graffiti-inspired elements and motifs. So the ultimate reduction down to the monochromatic is represented here in a very recent group of cloud scoops, as I'm now calling them, instead of cups. And then we have the intrusion of the outside world. We have the intrusion of and the anxieties brought forth by having, one, the first election of a Black president in Barack Obama, and the ongoing and ensuing tensions that has revealed and ripped asunder within our country. And so we have the first time in my life that I felt like I needed to stop making my beautiful abstract investigations and point my work towards something very relevant to me in my space, and to sort of reconcile with the hate that's coming out that's always been there, but just under the surface. Hate that was deliberate and in our faces and has been more and more. And so I determined to use the space and platform of ceramics, the platform of sculpture, and the abstracted vessel shape as a place to interrogate these ideas through these ironic deployments of stereotype characters pulled from the pages of popular media, from comic books deliberately pointed to children in the 1940s and 50s, representing people of color in the most vicious and nasty ways. And I wanted to look at that stuff and look at the conventions of drawing. These were put out there for humor's sake, and now I'm delivering them in a new package. And so the object that they invest or are working within seem as if they unfold on one side with a crease across the middle, as if it's a book that could be opened. And on the other is a monochromatic sculpture that harkens back to mid-century modernism, wherein the European greats and American great artists were pulling from and looking at and stealing for the artistic aesthetics of the African continent to build a legacy of modern sculpture. And so there is a definite nod to those shapes and forms in the overall structure of these vessels. And then the hollow spot is an orifice of some mysterious note. Is it a mouth? Is it a porthole? Is it an exhaust pipe? And I went this way because, like Kara Walker's sentiment here, I felt the need to make work that was based on race, that would help me understand the pain that my parents had to deal with, that I was somewhat numb to. And so I made a series of these in 2010 that dealt with different jazzy improvised forms of silhouettes of pots. You can see here that this is the neck of a pot at the top, and then the distortion of the body moves down, and it wiggles and moves, not unlike the wiggling and moving postures of breakdancers on the ground. And then on the other side is unmasked, a nasty representation of a person of color. This is a character from a comic book from the 1940s called Whitewash. That was his name. Comic books like this, more fun comics, where the humor is double fold here with two ugly racial stereotypes in one. And then alongside that, I positioned a 1920s piece of sheet music with a contemporary designer sculpture, mostly because the designer sculpture inhabits this kind of posture that comes from the hip hop community, this sort of sway back, swoop position, where the aesthetics have been transmuted by graffiti writers and comic book illustrators to distill this sort of magical relationship between line, edge, and posture. And I just wanted to show a little bit of a connection to that here that I find exciting. Little Tuffy was occupied a piece of work in that first series as well. This one is a slight ghost of the first one called We Did It, with the black character on it. And these are some of the things that are psychic backbone inspirations to these objects, these African masks and sculptures. And so this piece graces the opening of the Hunterdon show, and it came from that very first series of work back in 2010. And it is the piece that greets you at the front of my exhibition now, and it's called Looking Back at the Future, which is sort of a twisted enveloping kind of Mobius strip of a statement. Looking back at the future is this little Audrey character from the comic book is sort of gazing through a porthole, a two-dimensional porthole in a three-dimensional form that, again, looks as though it is an amalgamation of African aesthetics on the backside. And she's, based on the title, looking at hopefully a rosy blue sky future, but that future is ugly, as we've all witnessed in the last couple of years. In no small part because of the tumultuous times that we've had since Obama's rise to the presidency, and ever since, it's just been a raking back of all of the racial bitterness that's still here, that's not been dealt with, that we need to deal with. And so I determined to make another series, a new series that's probably even more overt and hopefully even more original. Many of the drawings that populate these new sculptures are my own invention. They're a distillation of those tropes and conventions of stereotypes, but they move beyond that. So I was asked to share with you a little bit about the building method of these things and how I improvise form. And so I build a platform that's sort of like a roof peak, and I design a slab to go on that. And on that slab already exists the drawing that will be populating the front. And so that remains hidden throughout the procedure of building the object. And then the object is completely improvised from just the bare silhouette of the two-dimensional slab. And so here we are sort of mid-build through a new piece that I'm working on. This new piece, the front image is based on another comic book character, not this one here, but we can see the associations that superheroics and the comic book medium plays within popular media, with Obama here figured as Superman. And, you know, even through something like in the 1970s and 80s with Bill Cosby's the Brown Hornet character, there have been very few opportunities to see Black superheroes in print. Just like my mother's coloring book was a remedy to the invisibility of people of color in something as simple as a coloring book, there's been very limited opportunities. And Bill Cosby created this as a remedy for that. And then I have this Ubangi tribesman here showing just like what an amazingly strange and awkward world we live in, where you can have the co-location of an iPod, some cash in his hand, his indigenous decorations of body paint and jewelry, and a Kalash, some kind of rifle on his neck. I mean, this is just disturbing and exciting and amazing. And I want to have those same kinds of things happen when you look at the distortions and blisterings of glaze and form in my works. And here we see the image that will be populating the front of this object is an amazingly virile African-American superheroic form, but done in the era of the 1940s. It's an amazing piece that I'm excited to finish up. This piece is in the show at the Hunterdon, and this is it in process. It's called After All. And you can see better here the peak of the form, the rooftop form that I build these on, and then they get stood up. This one is called Gladhand. It's also in the Hunterdon show, and sort of is an appealing hand. And the question is it reaching out for help? or is it reaching out to share? Is it a positive or a negative? Is it in pain, or is it a unity symbol? It's up for you to figure out. Another work in the show deals directly with the dramatic death of Emmett Till in the 1950s. And I imagine Emmett's ghost as a reaction of his figure, who was an open casket demanded by his mother in 1955. And now it is inverted, floating above the ground in a piece called A Benevolent Manifestation Over the Land. And I'd like to imagine that Emmett Till has an infinite amount of forgiveness for the devastation that was done to him and our people. This piece is known as Gleeful Anxiety, and it's built off of variations of drawings I did of my own son as a toddler. And I mutated it into this racial stereotype character that seems to be in a moment of anxious excitement that's got unknown consequences and unknown source. The back side of the piece represents African textiles and kind of a dramatic abstraction of form, doing a yin-yang of inversions. And this one is called Pickled Self-Hate, and has a twisted jigaboo character with X'd out eyes crammed into the bottle shape of this large silhouetted form here. And so again, we round back around to the exhibition proper, and we can see the relationship of front to back iterations. And so at the back of the exhibition, we finally come and confront a piece that on the back side, as we can see here on the right, has a bullseye symbol on the back, kind of offset. And then the front side, if we call it the front, is the unfolding truth that the title tells us, which is Tuffy Made Safe. So he's been shot in the back and pacified as a potential threat to our society, a threat to whoever, who knows, but people of color are under attack. And I wanted to make these striking symbols to say these things have to stop. Most exciting of all is that another full circle phenomena has happened because of the Hunterdon and because of that show that happened previously with Peters Valley Craft Center that I was so happy to be involved with. But this amazing individual, Mark Roxy, saw my work in that previous group show and immediately recognized the hip hop content within my strategies, the hip hop content in form and contour, the graffiti scents and whiffs. And he approached the Hunterdon on his own and asked if he and his Roxy Ballet could create a unique dance performance based on my work that will be revealed on April 23rd near the closing of the show. So that's me with Mark Roxy, who was actually featured in the film Beat Street, which I still get shivers even trying to describe this amazing moment. But Beat Street was a phenomena of the early 80s hip hop movement, and Mark Roxy himself was featured in that as one of the breakdancers, as a real agent of breakdancing in New York City. And he then dedicated his life to dance and ballet and created the Roxy Ballet, where he's the creative director. And then he, on his own, approached my work and has determined to create an original dance work based on my artwork, which I'm so excited and thrilled to be a part of, and I can't wait to see what those results are. So I would entreat you all to figure out if you can get here to Clinton, New Jersey, and see the show and see this performance on April 23rd. And so I'll end with the power figure of Little Tuffy, who I built in 3 dimensions a few years ago as the final resolution of the fact and sort of honoring my mother and her creation and honoring the bravery of my parents to come together to make me and my brother, Jason. And this is what we hope for. This is what Evermore Nevermore is all about what this beautiful young lady represents, that she spontaneously walked up and reflected the Black pride, power raising of fist that Little Tuffy has there. And I would wish that we all could come together and react just like her. So thank you very much and good evening.
Malcolm, I guess I was on mute for a moment, so I'll start again and just thank you so much for this very moving talk, and for sharing your work with us and the work of so many other important artists. It's such an important talk to hear. I'm so glad we'll be able to continue showing this on other platforms. It's just, I feel so lucky to have been able to see your work every day at the museum while your show is up, and can't wait to go back and see it now that I've heard this talk. I think there are a couple of comments in our chat.
I can see those.
Saying how awesome it was and what a great talk, inspiring, and thanking you again for sharing your important work.
Well, thank you for allowing me to indulge in showcasing some people that don't often get showcased as much as they should. I know this was mostly about me, but I took the opportunity to branch out and share many of the amazing people of color that are gracing artwork within our world. And I'm just one of those agents.
We are so glad that you shared that with us, and thank you. And we're looking forward to seeing you in person on the 23rd with the Roxy Ballet. For those of you who are nearby, please come. It's going to be on the Toshiko Takeizu Terrace at the museum, and it should be very exciting. So again, Malcolm, thank you so much. Really appreciate this. Have a good evening.
Thank you.